Hi, I'm happy to be here with you today, and together we'll work on this project, this gentle sheep. And I want to just take a minute and tell you how it came about. I was having a really hard time emotionally. Something had happened and I felt really bad, and I was being very hard on myself. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And I wanted to find a way out of those feelings. And I remembered that often people turn to art journaling to work things through and to settle things out and be able to move forward. So I decided to give that a try. And my plan was to include a lot of journaling in the piece, but in the end, not really have it show. And the reason I chose the lamb or the sheep was I started looking up the spiritual meaning of various kinds of animals. And I was looking back in my own experience and remembered when my husband and daughter and I went to the Cow Palace for a livestock show. And we saw the most beautiful sheep. She was a Corriedale, and she came over to us and put her feet up on the bottom rail of the fence that she was behind and looked up into my daughter's face. And my daughter petted her and their eyes locked. And it was just a moment that I always remember as being full of gentle kindness. And when I looked up the spiritual meaning of sheep, that's exactly what I found. Gentle, kind, be kind to yourself. So that's the explanation of the subject and how the piece came about. So I'm going to put that aside and begin talking about how we prepare for the project. Now, I like to work on this 1/4-inch hardboard. You can get this stuff at home improvement stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. And if you or someone you know has the capability of cutting the board, you can do that, or you can actually have them cut it for you at either of those stores. So I like to work on it just because it's nice and rigid. It's not going to warp. It's not going to move around. The paper's not going to move around. The water's not going to pool. The paint's not going to pool. But of course, you can use paper as well, and you could use watercolor paper, or you could use mixed media paper. And the paints I'm going to be using are fairly simple, quite accessible. They are simply these acrylic craft paints. And I primarily use 2 brands, Americana Deco Art and Ceramcoat by Delta. But the point really is to allow you to get a good feel for what colors I'm using. So, and of course, you could use them in any paints that you have. So I've included in your PDF a color palette that just shows the colors and then names the actual paint color and the brand in case you already have them or you want to get some. And I also want to say just that they're very affordable. A bottle like this should be around $2, and they come in lots of colors. So much about the paint. And then you have the drawing in your PDF and also instructions about how to transfer it. So the only thing I'm transferring at this point is the very outline, because I'm going to be working on the background. And what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to be super careful about not going over any of these lines. That's just not going to be possible with the technique that I'm using. But I did want to mark where the outline of the sheep is so I know what area to focus on. So I'm going to use a light blue, a darker blue, a light I guess I'd say orchid, and a darker. And I'm also going to be using a brayer or possibly a scraper. And instead of a scraper, you can use an old credit card, and the brayer is not necessary if you don't have one. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to dab these colors randomly over the background, and then I'm going to mush them around and combine them with the brayer and the scraper. So there's no particular pattern that I'm using for where I'm putting the paints. Just random. And I'm not going to be able to control it very much anyway once I get started here. And this may end up being too much paint for this area, and if it is, yeah, it probably is going to be. We'll scrape a little bit off. Okay, that should be more than enough, and I think I'm going to just kind of move that aside with my finger. Okay, so brayer. And I don't want to do too much because I don't really want to mix the colors. I want to have significant areas where you see the individual colors. And then I'm just going to wipe some back. I have kind of a lot up in this area. Maybe I can pick some of it up. Yes, that's working. Now this is just the bottom layer. We're going to do 2 layers. All right, now we just have to leave this to dry. Okay, that first layer of paint dried, and then I proceeded with the next step, which was to do my journaling, and I just used a pencil for that. I started with a H lead, which is kind of a mid-range, hardish lead, but it wasn't showing up very much, so I switched to an HB, which is a little softer and makes a little darker line. So I avoided writing over where the sheep is going to be because we're going to be using the white of the original surface to build her up, and I don't want to have to cover all the writing on her before I do that. So now I am going to do basically the same thing as I did before with adding the color, but I'm going to try to remember to do one additional thing, which is when I have the paint down and it's wet, to put drops of water on it randomly and let it sit for a while and then try and pull the color back up that way. So we'll see how that works. Also, I've put, instead of dabbing or putting the paint directly from the jar onto the piece, I have it here on my palette, and I'm going to see if I can add it that way instead. If I want to, I can leave some places where, on purpose, where the writing, where I'm allowing the writing to show through more than other places. Now, it's not going to show through so much that you can actually read it, but it'll show through a little bit. So where I have the paint really thick, I'm going to dab it off a little bit. And then I have my dropper with the water. And we'll have to let that dry. Or not dry. Sorry, let it sit for a few minutes to soak up the paint so I can pull it back off. So let's see how that works. Up here, I think I see in this puddle that some of the paint is being sucked up, so let's see. Yes. So it picked up the paint and allows a little bit of the writing to show through. When I paint the sheep, the left side is going to be in shadow, so for that shadow, I'm going to partly rely on paint that's underneath. So, although I was so careful, or not that careful, but sort of careful to not get the paint over where the sheep was, I'm now just going and adding a little bit so that I'll have some of my shadow areas started for me. It's going to be a pretty interesting effect when we put the white over and have the white more opaque or more layers in some places and fewer layers in others, and that's what's going to help give us shadows and highlights on the sheep. I'm going to call that good, and we'll come back to begin working on our sheep. We're back with our sheep, and I hope you had a good time working on the background. I always enjoy those backgrounds where colors just smooshed around and you don't exactly know what you're going to get. So here it is after the background, the first 3 layers, and the writing is between the first and third. So what I did after we finished yesterday, which I didn't really see a lot of point of showing on camera, was I just filled the area of the sheep with white, and I used gesso, slightly thinned. Gesso's tends to be more transparent than white paint, and I wanted it a little more transparent even than it normally is because of the edges of the sheep. It helps to make her fur look soft, to have a soft edge. So after I did that, I went ahead and transferred all the details on the sheep. Now, actually, I should say that before I filled her in with the gesso, I had to reestablish some of those outlines. So that is where we are. And in painting the sheep, we're going to spend most of our attention on the eyes, the nose, or the muzzle, nose and mouth, and the ears. And then the fur will be much more loosely painted. So with her eyes, let me just get started because the very first color I'm going to apply needs to dry before I do anything else. So it was not easy for me when I was looking at source photos of sheep to really tell what color their eyes were, but it seemed like they were fairly light. You know, not like a squirrel's eyes or a bear's eyes even, which are dark brown, maybe almost even black. So I just decided that I was going to start with a bright yellow, which is my golden straw, and I'm going to go ahead and just fill in those areas. But in the end, when I'm done with her eyes, I don't want them to appear super light. So I'm going to add more color. I'm going to add color shading and a little extra color that may or may not actually be in sheep's eyes. So just have to wait for that to dry a little bit. And I'm going to dab in a little bit of white at maybe 7 o'clock, which is going to end up being the secondary highlight in the eye. Now I want to take a few minutes to demonstrate a technique that I'm going to be using quite a bit on the features, and that is called floating. And this is a decorative painting technique, and you do it with a flat brush. It involves loading your brush only part way. In other words, you don't put the whole brush head in the paint, just part of it, just the side. Wipe it on your palette a little bit to even the color out, and then when you make your stroke, you're getting more color deposited from the loaded side of the brush, and then the color fades away. So that's called floating with a side loaded brush. Sometimes I refer to it as side loading. And our first step, now that these eyes are pretty much dry, is going to be a float of our honey brown all around the inside, or all around the rim, the outside edge of the eye. And this is making the eye a little darker, but only on the outside, not in the middle. And sometimes, like when I just did this stroke and then that stroke, when I did the second stroke, this edge of the brush was interfering with, or was going over the area that I painted before, messing it up a little bit, but I think we're okay. Now, I'm going to add some bright color into the eye. This is what I mentioned about adding color that I'm not really sure is there in the eye, but looks good. So I'm using this turquoise and a little brush. Where did it go? Here we go. I'm just going to put a little bit of turquoise around the iris. I mean on the iris, around the pupil. Next, I'm going to use a darker color, but I'm going to need to let this dry a little bit, so be back in a sec. Now I'm going to use a dark brown, dark burnt umber, and I'm going to, on the right side and the bottom edge of the eyes, I'm going to paint the color on the outside of the eye. On the upper edge and the left side, I'm going to have the color actually on the eyeball itself. Now there's little folds on the upper, or delineating the upper and the lower eyelids, and I'm going to shade in those folds with a medium brown. I like to move my piece around while I'm painting so that I'm always pulling my stroke in a direction that's comfortable for me, because you've probably discovered as well that some directions seem to work better for you than others. There's probably more we're going to do later. For now, I'm going to go ahead and do the pupils black. Now, sheep have horizontal pupils. I know other animals do too. I'm not thinking right away of what they are. And a tiny white highlight. Now she looks kind of wide-eyed to me, and I think that's because of that very white rim around her eyes. So I'm going to go with kind of a lighter float of the medium brown, and that will set her eyes in a little better. Yeah, that's better. So all these directions are in the PDF, but sometimes as you're working, you just, you know, have to do what you think is going to look right. And I thought that that white was just too much. And I think that's better. I also think I want to add a little bit over here. She's, her head's tilted very slightly. Still looks weird to me, and I don't know why, but maybe that will reveal itself as I go ahead. I would like to see the corners be darker. And this is just a medium brown. Okay, I'm not totally happy with that, but we'll leave it for now. Well, one thing I see actually is that I think the pupil should come over a little further. Okay. And maybe here too. And we can always put that highlight back in. Okay, this is called fussing too much, so we need to stop that for a minute. All right, I want to gather my thoughts and then we'll start on the muzzle. Okay, for the muzzle and the ears, I'm basically going to be using 3 colors. This is sort of a, this is actually called warm neutral. This is called warm beige. This one's lighter and a little warmer than this. So I'm using those 2 and then the medium brown. So the first thing I'm going to do is just fill in her nose. I'm going to add the lighter color in the inner part of both ears. I'm going to add a float of the same color just over the top edge of the nose. I'm going to go down both sides of this little slit in the middle of the muzzle. And I'm going to go on the upper edge of the lower lip here. Her upper lip would be hanging over the lower one, so it would be lighter. Now I'm going to start to add deeper shadows and some highlights on the ears and the muzzle, and I will use this darker, let's see, which one is the darker one? Warm beige, I think, is the darker one. Yes. No. Warm neutral is the darker one. Anyway, you have them on your color chart. So I'm just going to float the shadow. It's not that much darker, but it's a little darker. And then in the top parts of the ear, which are shaded by the ear flap folding over. Makes it look a little different, not that much. I am going to work on the nose some more. And I'm going to start out with my medium brown on a pointed brush. And I'm going to darken the nostrils with a stroke that starts out wide and gets narrow. Or I may have to do it the other way around here, because otherwise I'd be putting my hand in wet paint up here. Brown in the deepest shaded areas of the ears. So I really enjoy the technique of painting shadows in layers, where you start off with the widest, biggest area in the lightest shadow color, and then take your area smaller as you go to darker colors. I am going to figure this is dry enough to work around there. And I'm just going to use a thin float, narrow float. On either side of that indentation there. And along the center part of the upper edge of the lower lip. So I want her to have, you know, not a big smile, but a peaceful expression. And I hope that's what we're going to get here. I think I can use a little more there, but probably needs, no, it's too much. That's too much. Not by a lot though, so come back and take some out. Just with water. And then back up to the ears for a minute with my flat brush and the medium brown. And I'm just gonna, you know how there's all that fur in the ears that kind of comes together over the darkest areas where the inner ear actually starts. So I'm just gonna dab some color. Okay, and now we're back in the fussing realm. All right, I think that is pretty good. All right, I'm going to stop at this point, and when we resume, we're going to work on building the form of the head with highlights and shadows, and then creating the texture of the fur. So I will see you then. Up till now, we've been focusing on the features of our ewe, or lamb, or sheep. And now we're going to turn to the fur. And there's really not that much we're going to do on the fur. It's mostly the features and then just the forming of the three-dimensional shape of the face and the body using highlighting and highlights and shadows. And the highlights and shadows are also the way we're going to make the texture of the fur. So you can see this is the one I did preparing for the video, and this is the one we're working on now. So you can see there's not very much. We have some blue showing through the gesso, and that'll be the beginning of shadows in the areas where we want shadows. And then we have the thicker gesso that's occurring in some places where we want more of a highlight. So we're just going to be working section by section, and for each one we'll evaluate, like we're going to start with the muzzle, which I think we already did a little bit of, and the face, these cheeks, and then the ruffs. And for each section we'll just evaluate, okay, what have I got now in terms of highlight and shadow, and what do I need to add? So my primary shadow color is going to be drizzle gray, and then for the deepest shadows I'm going to use floats of watered down medium brown. And for the highlights I'm going to use mostly gesso. Then in certain places I will use white paint, which is actually more opaque than the gesso, so it's going to show more strongly. Okay, so starting with the face, the center part of the face, we have, as I was saying also, we're going to be working on the texture of the fur. So the texture of the fur on the center parts of the face, the fur is very short, and so it's going to have a very smooth look. So we're going to apply paint smoothly. And okay, so I'm putting the gesso on the areas that are going to be highlighted, and then I'll work a little bit on shadow areas, and excuse my nose, and mostly on the central part of the face. The shadows are up under this, what would you call it? The fur on the top of the head is thick and woolly and curly, and it forms like a little shelf sticking out over the part of the face between the eyes. So we can do that just with the wide brush, started with a float and pulling some color down. Okay, and let's see, my liner, I think I'll use some gray. It looks like there's sort of some longer hairs starting to grow here and then push up into the fluffy part over the face. So I'm come from the shadow area into the highlight area with the shadow color, and then come back with the highlight color, the gesso, up into the shadow area. So the nose, the muzzle, how do I put it? There's a central part of the face from between the eyes down to the nose that is fairly flat, but then it rounds down and then the cheeks come out. So the edge of the cheeks, and we're still with pretty short fur. So the edge of the cheeks would be highlighted. It's hard to do the shadow area right now because I'm concerned I'm going to get into that, mess up that white that I just put on, but we'll try. And after I put it on, I clean my brush and just pull it lightly outwards to soften that. And on the other side, the same thing. Okay, now we're going to move out from there, and we have this beginning of this little ruff here. Now the edge of the cheek is smooth, or the fur is smooth, so that edge is going to be smooth as well. And we'll sink the eye a little bit or the area to the side of the eye like that. And on the other side. Now the areas, this area under the ear is shadow. So we can see already we're beginning to get some form going here. Okay. Just going to use the chisel edge of the brush and the shadow color and add a little fluff. And as we continue to move away from the face and we start adding the shadows, we're seeing the muzzle come forward. Let's use our round brush and the gesso and add some curly fluff. Okay, and my liner again. Now let's go to a smaller flat. That one's maybe a little big. Just put in some curved strokes back and forth, looking like curly fur. I'll use some gesso again. And I'm thinking that since the light is coming slightly from here, which we can tell by where the highlights are in the eyes, that this edge would start to curve back. And so I think we can add a light bit of shadow there. Now over in here is just chop, chop, chop. I'm using the larger flat brush now. And the shadow edge of the white fur in the ear. But I left it white where it came over that shadow area so that it would show. Now for the top of the head, back to my small flat. So it's kind of interesting how much texture you can get with just not that much color, but I think to a large extent it's because a little bit of the background blues are showing through there. Just thinking about the shape and how to portray that with just these two colors. I have more texture on the top of the head, but I'm going more lightly. Don't have as much paint on the brush. All right, I'm going to let that dry and then come back and put some more color over it. But so far so good. Well, now we're ready to finish up our sheep. And what we'll be doing is adding a little more shading and then some final touches. So for the shading, I'm using a mixture of the medium brown and the gray. And I'm just applying this where the shadows are going to be the deepest, and that's going to be under this little shelf of fur on the forehead, and behind the eyes to help set them in. Under the chin. A little bit on the shadow side of the animal. And in these deeper areas. Okay, and now for some white. I want to add bright white at the top of the head. So this painting is very cool, and I want to warm it up a little bit, and I'm going to use manganese blue, which is a warm blue, and I'm going to just add some of this warmer color in the shadow areas on the sheep. It's too much. And also parts of the background. I think that is a nice effect. Now I'm going to go back in this area with just the medium brown and make it a little less even. That bottom edge of the overhanging fur seemed a little bit too straight. And finally, I would like to really warm up the top. Now I'm using cadmium yellow for this highlight, and I have to have very, 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 very little paint on the brush, or it'll be too obvious. A little bit of warmth. Now, final thing to do is the lettering, and you can either choose to do what I did, or you can do whatever comes to your mind and touches you. So I will give you in the PDF this text. Now, if you want to do your own, the thing to do would be to get a piece of tracing paper and put it down over your piece and just do your text here and then transfer it as we did the sheep herself. And then, so I'm going to use I'm going to use a number 3 Staedtler pigment liner in black and just do the writing. Okay, so I'm pretty terrible at that writing, but that's the way it goes. So now I'll show you the stars, and you just put a dot, and then quick stroke away in each direction. As many, as few, as large, as small as you want. And the sizes are going to depend on the size brush you use and how big your dot of paint is to begin with. And there we have our sheep, the symbol of gentleness and kindness, which we need to give to ourselves and to others. So I hope you enjoyed the project, and hopefully you created a piece that you're happy with and you can hang on your wall and enjoy every day. Take care. Bye-bye.